Welcome to another episode from Add Agility. This time we're continuing our series on waste, and we're doing a nice easy one today. Well, I thought it was an easy one. Defects.
Yeah, I didn't think it was an easy one, but we've got it somewhere in between, haven't we?
Yes. So, looking at the waste of lean, we've already covered, what was it? Waiting. And now moving on to defects. This is quite an easy one to understand from software, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think it's quite involved, isn't it?
Yeah, there turns out there's quite a lot to it.
It's good. It's good to note as well, we're coming from the new Add Agility studio.
Yes.
Deep in the jungle.
Yes. Yes, that is my shed.
Yeah, it's the new shed, and it's all equipped for communications going out to the agile world.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, we're going to get started.
Yeah. So defects. When you're building software, and this particular series is really focused on software and how waste apply to it. Stuff goes wrong. And let's face it, who likes a defect? Nobody, right? Because there's a big cost to it, hey? Yes.
So if you're an end consumer, we all consume products in the digital age. We all consume stuff that's been built. And when we find a defect, we hate it. I'm going to tell you my radiator story.
Yeah.
Bought these radiators recently, and this is an example of why defects suck. Bought these radiators, thought, great, I want a radiator that is Wi-Fi enabled and smart home enabled, and I can basically just go and click a button from my bed on the app, and then the radiator will magically start in my office, so I can go out there and it's nice and warm. Could I get the whole thing to set up and work and connect to the Wi-Fi? No, I couldn't. And actually, I got suspicious when I downloaded the app and saw that it had 1 star. Yeah. So this is my top tip. If you take nothing else from this podcast, if you're buying a bit of hardware that has an app associated with it, always go and read the reviews on the app beforehand. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you won't be disappointed like I was, right? So I was bitterly disappointed, thought never going to buy from these people again because this is a shoddy product. So they're never going to get a sale out of me again. Bit of a black mark. They're losing money. And the other thing is, I tried to phone them to sort out this defect, and I was on there for many minutes, many times. I couldn't get through, and I imagine it's because there's a whole load of other people just like me who are really pissed off about their radiators, who are trying to get some response from them. And if they want to satisfy that customer demand to fix their problems, they've got to invest money in it. So there's a cost to the business as well, isn't there?
There is. So they're not going to sell as many products.
Yeah.
You're definitely not going to subscribe to any services they got.
Yeah.
And then they got those increased costs of having to deal with the problem after.
Yeah.
And actually, in a lot of cases, defects can lead to legal or regulatory challenges as well. So I've worked in trading environments where if you have certain defects in your system that causes you to breach regulations, you're in a whole world of fines and potentially even losing licenses to operate.
Yeah, massive cost to the business. And you were telling me an interesting story about MacDonalds earlier on.
Well, there was, and it's another example of a defect that's crept all the way into live. But McDonald's were bigger than the radiator company, and you can look this one up online. They had an error in their system where if you ordered a hamburger without the meat, so you just had the bun, the cost was minus 10 cents.
Yeah.
And people figured this out, and they figured out that actually if a hamburger with meat in was $1, then they could buy 10 buns at minus 10 cents each and get a free burger. So there's all these pictures and TikToks. It's just more of a TikTok video, this one.
Yeah.
Of people who go, hey, I got a free burger, and then just having these 10 spare buns that they just throw away. So
that's another waste.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's an interesting one because the system will work, technically correct, but that was definitely a defect.
Is it a defect or is it a feature? Aha! That's the age-old argument, isn't it? But that's definitely a defect.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's an interesting one. Both our examples, things have got all the way through to live, and that's expensive. Then, if your defect makes it into live,
it's expensive, and actually, the cost of fixing something that's in production is generally more expensive than fixing something before it gets to production in a lot of ways, and that's including not just your costs to the business, but also your internal costs of fixing it, right? Because you've got to go through a whole load more hoops once it's in production to get it sorted. And I think that brings us on to the next point. It's not just about that external perception and how you're impacting your customers. There's that whole internal friction, and defects cause massive problems in organisations, both within and between tech teams, but especially between the business and tech. And quite often companies we go into, there's a bit of a strained relationship sometimes between business stakeholders and business users and their counterparts in tech. Part of our mission when we go in is to just make them more of one team. But there's one thing that kind of causes endless amount of friction, and that is defects and unfixed defects and the rate at which you're progressing through defects. And plus the fact that focusing on defects, it means that they can't add those critical new business features to their products, and that just makes people annoyed.
It kind of snowballs into all the other kinds of waste. You think, defect. There's the obvious ones. But you're right. There's the friction. You often end up with keeping more inventory, if you use the lean language, where you want to release but you can't because it's broken. You got people then waiting maybe for approval. Ooh, do we go live with this defect or do we not? Oh no, we've got to wait for Bob to fix it. Meanwhile, Bob, who was working on something else, then has task switching. It just goes on, and the costs that are the hidden costs are often, except unless you're selling like burgers at MacDonalds, those hidden costs are often much higher than the obvious ones.
Yeah, indeed. And I would give plenty of other examples of where we've seen problems over the course of this podcast. It's worth moving on now to give a bit of context about how in lean and agile we generally address defects. A bit of an overview, because really the overarching concept is about not leaving quality to inspection at the end, isn't it?
Yeah. You don't want to wait till you've finished.
Yeah.
Or you think you finished before you check whether it works.
You want to build quality into the whole process throughout the life cycle, and one of the ways in which the early lean pioneers did this was by a concept they called poker yoker. I love it. I love that one. It sounds like a dance. It's not a dance. It's basically mistake proofing, right? It was originally called bakayoko, which meant idiot proofing, but Japanese, being very respectful people, actually thought, and part of the cornerstone of lean being respect for people and culture,
didn't call it idiot proofing.
They didn't call it idiot proofing. They changed it to mistake proofing. It's this concept. Shigeo Shingo, I think it was, introduced this, and he introduced things early on in the production line that would stop quality mistakes happening till right at the end. And so you see this in all devices you use now. There are foolproof mechanisms. I just slip back into that. There are mistake-proofing mechanisms to help make sure that you don't make a mistake. Actually, I just found this on the floor. Great example.
Yes.
That's just in the corner of my eye line. The Great British Plug, a massively awesome invention, right? You can't get your live and neutral plugged in the wrong way around. You can't electrocute yourself while plugging it in. The design is all there for mistake proofing, so you don't make that mistake and you don't electrocute yourself. Awesome. Poker yoker in action.
Very good.
Yeah, so I guess the concept is we're not leaving it till chance at the end, and we're not leaving it till the end to pick up the mistakes. And so we thought navigate this problem by traversing the software development lifecycle, didn't we?
Yes, we may have done that before, but it's a nice way to kind of hang the concepts.
Yeah, it kind of gives it a bit of structure.
Yeah, and it's easy to think of defects. Oh yeah, it's a dev mistake, but it's not. It's not just a dev mistake.
It's not. It's not a tester mistake either.
No.
Yeah. Because you could go in production, you could go, oh, I've got this defect. Oh, it must be the testers didn't catch that bug, and it's not their fault either. You've got to look at the whole process from the start, from that inception, when the idea is communicated, to when it's finally deployed out into production for consumption by your customers. Yes. So we kind of navigate the SDLC so from a sort of requirements analysis to design to development. I'm just reminding myself of the SDLC. We've separated out testing, although we know that nowadays in agile development, testing and development are all going hand in hand, but we've sort of separated them out just for ease of communicating the concepts here. And then we've finished with deployment and release, and then production support in live. All right, so we go through that life cycle, and we'll talk about some of the things that we've seen, some of the typical problems, and what are the solutions. Now, we're going to do this at quite a high level, aren't we? Because actually, it could be quite an involved subject.
Yeah, you could get into how to do all the details of testing, and we're not going to cover every which way you can test to build that quality in. We just touch on each part how defects can be introduced, and we like to do it with stories because it's a little bit more interesting.
We do stories,
and I've got one for the analysis stage. So
right, okay. So we're going to start off with analysis.
Yes.
And we're going to keep it right at high level.
Yeah.
And like you said, not get into the details. This is not how to do automated testing.
No.
This is not how to do continuous delivery and all the ins and outs, because that's probably several episodes.
Yeah. There's books on that. Books and books.
So we're going to start off here. You're going to have a stab at the requirements analysis bit.
Yeah. Well. This is a mistake I made. So
it's good to own up to your mistakes, because I'll do a bit of that later on as well.
So in years gone by, I was a business analyst and working for a health insurance company. And one of the things they did is they helped their clients find the right private hospital to go to, and we were helping develop the software that would send people to the right hospital. And as a BA, not fully understanding the requirement, I thought it would be fantastic if they could just be sent to the hospital nearest to them.
Right.
And that's what I wrote in the requirements. That was what was starting to be built.
Okay.
But it turns out, no, that's not the case. When actually someone wants to go to a hospital, sometimes they want to go and stay in a hospital near family. Sometimes they want to be in a specific location because they know they got support.
Right.
It's not just okay to send them to the one closest to their house.
Okay, yeah.
And this was my mistake as a BA, and thankfully we spotted it soon. I mean, the consequences of if that had made it into live,
right?
That mistake, we would have been sending patients to the wrong place.
How did it? Who spotted it then? Was it the business stakeholders and?
Well, the quality mechanism that spotted that was we demoed it.
Right. Okay.
So.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit awkward at the time, but then we were able to go on to fix it.
So that really, for me, sums up one of the key things about quality early on in the process is that you've got to have that business user, business stakeholder involvement all the way through.
Yep.
And I think it's one of the things that I think is key. They've got to be involved at every stage, and it's like that. What is it? Principle 4 of the Agile Manifesto. I can't remember the exact wording, but I
thought you were going to test me there.
No, but it's like business users and engineers are working together every day. It's something like that.
Yeah.
But it's so true, and quite a lot of the problems that I think we both see when we go and we do transformation work with people is that one of the problems is usually the business users and the stakeholders aren't working enough with the engineers. You know, they'll get involved at the beginning with sort of the high level requirements, but they won't get down to the nitty gritty. They won't get to your kind of particular hospital choice or something. You know,
yes.
And then sometimes they don't look at the code that's being produced. Luckily, you managed to catch that, right? But I've worked in plenty of places where people just don't turn up to demos. They don't. When an engineer says, "I've got some software ready to be looked at by business users," they're not there at hand for it.
Yeah.
And you know, it's so critical. But I think I see this as like a common problem where I go in and people focus on the engineering side of things. And they go, right, we've got to improve our development and we've got to improve our delivery of code.
Yes.
And you get that sorted, and then you realise, and this happened in an organisation I worked with recently, they're all complaining about IT not delivering enough stuff, enough features, and the output being low. And now we've worked with them for 3 months, and now it's sort of turned around, and they're going, well, I don't think we've got enough business resource to be able to deal with the level of change that's going on. And I think this is commonplace. If you're going to do transformation work, if you're going to up your level of tech resource capability, you've got to make sure that you've got enough people, enough spare resource free from the business side to actually be able to support that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my example, yes, it's fantastic that it didn't go into live. But actually, we'd wasted a load of dev time, a load of test time, and people's time demoing it. And if we'd brought the testing process earlier, you know, a bit of BDD, we could have used specification by example, you know, and written the tests beforehand, and we would have spotted it quicker.
I think that's absolutely key, isn't it? I think we've had quite a lot of success with that recently. Over the last few years actually, which is basically using this concept of specification by example. So instead of writing requirements, your requirements become actually they're like a scenario that uses real examples and real data. So that on its own is good because you're giving real examples and you can go through them with business users and go, is this how you want it to work? When you do this to the system, is this how you want it to respond? And they can really get their heads around that. And then the next best thing is that you can automate that as well.
Yes.
But that's in the development bit.
It is.
Am I jumping ahead of myself?
Yeah, I think we're there though, aren't we?
I think we're there with requirements analysis. It's like you've got to put that effort in right at the beginning to make sure that when an engineer picks up a user story, that you've had conversations with the business users in combination with POs and analysts, as well as the engineers and testers, to make sure that you're all aligned and make sure that you know what you're going to build, so that you don't waste your time building the wrong thing and creating defects.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
So, on to dev.
Well, actually, we're going to do design first.
Okay.
Not that I want to focus on design too much, but I think it's a good prelude to dev. So, with design, I think there's a key thing about technology choice before you get to the dev bit, and that is really choosing technologies that allow you to do agile development. Mm-hmm. Because you need technologies that actually support automation of everything. So they support automated testing. They support, kind of continuous deployment processes, so that you can build infrastructure as code. You know, there's a lot of packages out there at the moment because you know the world we work in, it's not just building stuff from the ground up. It's really easy to pick the technologies when you're building from the ground up that are going to do this, because most of the technologies that are commonly in use these days support all the agile techniques. But when you're buying packages, so working with a client at the moment, they've got an old legacy system. Actually, we're pretty much hamstrung by that because it's an old fat client system. So it's just got a database sitting back on a server, but all the logic is back in this client application, and it's not suited for really good automated testing. But there's very little you can do apart from move away from that kind of architecture to a new architecture. But that is a long process for a lot of organisations.
Yes.
So, when you're going out there and picking packages, just make sure that you're picking packages that will support modern agile techniques.
Yeah. The downside is then you either got to do a load manually, repeatedly manually, or accept that things are more likely to fail because you can't check it automatically.
Yep. And don't design monoliths either. Don't buy big monoliths because it's not going to work. It's not going to work for agile techniques. All right. So just be careful with your design choices and your package selection and the selection of tools you use so that they support agile techniques and automation and building quality in throughout the whole process.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. So that's the only thing I think I want to say in design.
Yeah.
We could do dev now.
We can do dev.
Do dev.
So there's the cliche with defects. I've heard this a lot in my career. I'm sure you have.
Yeah.
It worked fine on my machine.
Yeah. Okay.
So no developer, and you used to be a developer.
Yeah.
Wants to create defects, but quite often we find our developers just aren't given the tools they need.
Yeah.
So whether this is environments not matching, so something works fine on their machine, but when you put it into a higher environment or into a live system, it just doesn't behave the same.
Yeah.
It's hard. And another example I've seen is a company that thought they were absolutely blitzing it with their automated tests. They had a chart that counted how many automated tests they had, and it was going up and up and up, and they're really proud and they showed everybody. And then we looked at how often it was run.
Right.
And because the tests had gone up and up and up, and they kept failing, which was really annoying for them.
Yeah.
They didn't run their automated tests very often.
Yeah, this is a really interesting area because one of the things you should be doing as a developer in a modern development environment, I won't call it agile, it's just any modern development environment, you should be unit testing these days. It's one of the ways, it's one of those poka-yoke things. It's mistake proofing. It's making sure that you've got. It's not just about whether the code works. It's about ensuring that you've got the right design. All right. So you've got to build unit tests, and you've got to build good unit tests. And the important thing is that when you actually push that code into the source code repository, you want to make sure your unit tests pass, right? Because we see this quite often that people will create red builds on their continuous integration server. Or they'll run unit tests on their machine. Some of them will fail, but they'll still submit poor code.
So red build is where tests are failing and it's flashing up red.
Basically, yeah. So I think if you're going to actually take the time to do unit testing and continuous integration, you better make sure that you're actually looking at the results from your tests and making sure that you fix the problems as they arise, not letting them pile up.
Yes.
Yeah.
I once worked with a fantastic test architect called Sandeep, so shout out to Sandeep if he's watching. Yeah. And he built a build monitor that would flash up immediately when a build broke. Yeah. And it was on a monitor above people's desks. I can't remember whether he got as far as naming the individual. Yeah. I think the dream might have been eventually to have a big mechanical arm with a finger on it.
I think it was you.
It was him. But it meant that there was instant feedback if the builds had broken.
Yeah.
And that drive to keep them green. So if the tests were no longer valid, you'd go and look at the test. If things weren't working, you just have that instant feedback. And you can imagine what happened to the severity and frequency of defects in that team. They just went right down.
It's about that instant feedback, isn't it? It's about getting instantly alerted when there's a problem in the production of an item.
Yes.
It's so important, and it keeps the quality in there throughout the whole process. Yeah, it's good. It's good. I've seen some interesting behaviours when it's come to unit testing. we were running some sonar software with one client, which sonar is basically something that kind of looks over your code base, and this is a good method of ensuring some quality as well. But it requires a certain amount of honesty in the developer's approach.
Yes.
So Sonar checks your code base, and it checks that you've got coverage in unit tests. So it makes sure. So if you've got a low coverage, it means not a lot of your code is actually tested by unit tests. If you've got a high coverage, then a lot of your code is tested. Now, we wanted to ensure that a lot of the code was covered by unit tests. Obviously, that's a good ambition, right? But we're working with an unscrupulous third party.
Right.
And they were building tests that would pass themselves without actually testing. It was just incredible. Yes. And all hell let loose when we found this out, and it was insane. So you know, if you're going to use these tools, make sure that everybody's using them honestly, I would say. All good?
Yes.
So we've covered a few ways in which we can build quality into the development process, and usually, largely that's around unit testing and automation of other testing artifacts. Like, you know, when we were talking about requirements gathering and we were talking about behavioral driven development, you know, gathering requirements in given when then format, in Gherkin format.
Yes.
You know, when it comes to development, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you can automate as much of those acceptance tests as possible. So that's another activity in the development pipeline which will ensure quality.
Yeah. I think it's worth calling out as well that it's, we've said this already, it's a team thing. Everyone is responsible for the quality. I've seen many a team where developers don't want to test. They don't see it as their role. And if you've got a visual work tracking system, you'll see all these items building up in test.
Yeah.
And if you overstack one person with testing everything and leave it to entirely them, it's not going to work out well.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
think that moves us on to test.
Testing.
So we have covered quite a lot with automation already, because there's that blurring, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think that's it. Like, development and testing, it's not. Well, none of this these days is a stage by stage process, is it? Kind of everything blurs into each other, and specifically around development and testing, it's all kind of an interaction. It's a continual sort of cycle of people creating scenarios and then wiring them in with code to make sure that they're automated. You know, it's that continual cycle, and it's continual interaction between all the people on the team. It's not really kind of separate thing, and it's definitely not separate silos, and which I think would lead me on to my first point. If you want to ensure quality, don't have a separate test team. So,
yes,
working on a really large multi-channel program, and this is many years ago, probably 10 or 12 years ago now, and it was set up in it wasn't set up for success, I would say. It was lots of different suppliers. I was working with the people who were supplying the front end multi-channel solution, but there was people who were doing all the back end stuff, people doing the integrations, all separate suppliers. It was destined to failure, especially when they decided to bring in a separate test team. Now, instead of bringing them right in at the beginning, the separate test team were brought in quite near the release time.
Right.
So you can imagine what happens. You've got a bunch of people who arrive on the project and they don't know the requirements and not familiar with them. And so this caused inordinate amount of problems because they didn't really understand the user stories that were in the system. They didn't understand the requirements the other suppliers were coming up with and building to. And so you just got this glut. You know, and they thought their job was to raise problems with the system. It's like, I'm a tester. Yes. Oh, I've got to raise defects. Otherwise, it looks like I'm not doing anything.
Yes.
And so you got these glut of defects coming out. Most were not defects. They were just people not understanding how the system was supposed to work. It was terrible. And, you know, one of the great things I see these days is hardly any organisations using that separate test team approach. Most are bringing testers into the team and having a cross-functional team that includes both testers and developers. It's key. It's absolutely key to success. Yes. It's
generally a lot better than it was.
Yeah.
The only other thing I think I want to mention on top of what we've already got is there's often a challenge that the testing to some people feels like a waste. And I've had this challenge before, particularly from business stakeholders, when you say, look, at the start we're going to spend some time setting up this automated testing framework, and it means actually you're not going to get as many shiny features in the first few weeks.
Yeah.
Because we are going to do automated testing properly. What they don't always realise is the long-term view, the maintainability of that thing if they want to change it 2 years' time, or even your speed when you get 6 months in, is faster.
It's that old adage, isn't it? You always hear people say, go slow to go fast, right? And what you want to do is, there's that temptation in the beginning. There's the whole pressure to get to that first release of product. And it's like, we want to jam a load of features into there and we've got to get this out. And people are cutting corners. They're not thinking about building a maintainable code base. But it's important because all our software, we should be expecting it to have a long life, shouldn't we? We should be expecting to be using that software in 5 years' time, not having to throw it away because it's a legacy system, right?
Yes.
So, put your effort in now so that you're not ending up in a real mess later, I think is a really good lesson, actually. And the other thing as well, I just want to revisit while we're on the testing thing. Don't leave inspection till the end. So UAT, and it's interesting. I've just worked with a client recently and said we want you to tell us a sort of strategy of how we're going to do UAT. And I'll say, well, UAT really isn't a phase at the end anymore. UAT is something we continually do. So part of the model that it's basically just an agile development model. It's just moving the UAT into the sprint lifecycle and trying to get this, what I was speaking about earlier, this continual business user involvement, so that they're helping to define the stories. And then they're actually getting hold of live working functionality afterwards and sitting down with the devs and running some scenarios through it themselves. So they're not waiting right till the end just before release to do inspection at the end.
Yes.
So you're building that kind of business interaction right throughout the process.
Yeah, and it's that whole things get exponentially more expensive to fix the longer you leave them.
Yeah.
So I've worked in a startup where a dev, when they'd finished something, would literally take their laptop downstairs to the business team and said, I've built this, does that look right?
Yeah.
And if it didn't, the cost to fix it, he had the code open and he'd just sort it. But if you'd waited a week, he might have forgotten what he'd done. If you'd waited 2 weeks, then it was merging with other code. It might have been hard to find.
Yeah.
If you'd waited months, what was that? And he's got to pick through mountains to try and find, assuming they're still at the company.
No, it's that old adage of stop starting and start finishing. It's like before you pick up your next thing, just make sure the thing you just developed works. And I think that is one of the key lessons that people need to know. Don't leave it till the sprint review to demonstrate functionality. If you've got something working on day one, just go and show it to somebody. Make sure that you've got validation that you've built the right thing, and then you can put it to bed, move on to the next thing. Happy days.
Yes.
All good.
Oh.
Wow, that's the testing bit.
Releases.
Deployment and release. I got a few things on here, actually. So one of the key things to do with your releases and your deployments is, if you want less defects, just reduce your batch size that you're releasing, right? So instead of all the worst projects I've worked with, it's basically, the ones that have had the most defects are the ones that are most monolithic in nature and have the biggest amount of stuff in them. Yeah, it's bad because you get swamped with defects, and then you end up in some sort of crazy 1 to 3 month fix cycle of constantly going back round testing dealing with defects, picking up defects, then testing it, and then trying to... It's just a nightmare. It causes confusion for everybody.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think what you want to do is you want to get to regular small releases. And I think... So I read the book ages ago, that Continuous Delivery book, Jez Humble, Dave Farley. One of the key lessons I always remember from that, I think, was they were said, if something is difficult, do it more regularly till it becomes easy, right? And this is the life cycle that a lot of people go through when they're trying to get better at releasing. They start off, and releasing's a nightmare because they're doing it every 1 to 3 months, and they're releasing stuff in large batches. But I went through this. Travis Perkins, when I went now, I was building the Wix solution, which was Wix.com, and we were releasing that on a completely new platform. So we were doing a platform migration and migrating to Hybris. It was quite a big old job, and we started off with typical big monolithic releases, and then we'd only release every month or every 2 or 3 months, and then we started getting into the automation and trying to get better deployment. So we got it down to every 2 weeks, but it was a hard journey. But you can guarantee when we did those 2-week cycles, we'd have much less defects, and it was much easier to find them and find where the problem was, and then push the release out. And of course, everybody's happier when you do that, right? Yes. I think you get a big whole uptick in developer satisfaction when they're getting their stuff out more regularly, it's being used.
Yes.
There's more automation, so they're not repeating manual rubbish stuff all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's just, you get the motivation levels are much higher when you start to get to one of those environments. So it's good. Cut down your deployment size. Do your releases more regularly. It's the basics.
Yeah. For my sins, I once had a release manager role at a startup, and that's a hard job. It's not a very liked job.
No.
There's a lot of pressure. People being asked to fix stuff don't like being asked to fix stuff at short notice.
Yeah.
And people above you wonder, where's the release? When is it? But what we did is we did exactly what you said. We took the batch size that was, it was every 3 months we were releasing.
Yeah.
And we eventually got it down to a week.
Yeah.
And we did that by just doing it more. So first of all, we worked out all the steps that we had to do. It's like, oh wow, this is a 20. I think it was a 23-step process if my memory is right. But then we realised, you look at that enormous process. You think, okay, well, 50% of the work's in these 2 steps.
Yeah.
We can automate that really easily.
Yeah.
So even if you can't automate the entire process, often there's enough of it that you can do faster and better.
Yeah, I think, and it's only when you start doing releases on a regular basis, are the improvements that you need to do for the next one in the back of your mind. Because if you leave it 3 months, then you've kind of forgotten about everything that went wrong last time and what you need to do to fix it this time. So I find that if you do it on a more regular basis, people are much more inclined to do a continuous improvement activity around it. Yeah. Yes. And I like your mention about looking at the process and trying to automate things and getting it wired, because I've been a bit caught out by release processes before. So one of my biggest sins when I was managing a project team at Flybe, one of the service managers came in one day and they said, well, we keep getting these people. They're turning up to the gate with these reservation confirmations, and we're looking them up in the system, and we can't see them. So we can't see that booking reference number in the system, and fortunately, some of these folks had been let through the gate because it looked like they had a genuine confirmation, even though the reservation couldn't be found in the system. So some person at the gate thought, oh, this must be a system problem, let them through. But some customers have been told to go back home because they thought it was a fake reservation, right? Now, just so turned out that this was early days in our deployment process, and somebody had made a mistake. I think they probably realised they'd made a mistake as well, but they probably thought it wouldn't have such an impact as it did. But they had...
And this was your team?
Yeah. I admit it now.
Yeah.
I'm coming clean.
Yes, enough years have passed.
Yeah. Well, when I'm judged at the pearly gates, I'm sure it won't count against me. But somebody had taken our live website and they just made a config mistake at the back end. So everybody who was placing an order and paying for it on the live website, the order had gone into the test legacy airline reservation system, so it wasn't seen by anybody at the gate. And they must have realised this and then rolled it back quite quickly, and then then put the config right, and it was going. But I don't think they realised what impact it had, because we're like taking thousands of orders a day, and just in the small in that small space of time, I think then quite a few orders got into the test system, and then obviously some people turned up and were turned away.
That would be an expensive defect.
That would be an expensive defect. Now, the way you kind of fix that is really looking at your deployment process and making sure that you've got it wired, and automation can really help with that. So it was good to see you mention automation as well. But if you've got an automated deployment pipeline where you're pulling the config from a source code repository, you kind of avoid those mistakes, you know? And automation is really the key to cutting out manual mistakes, isn't it? So all throughout that process, deployment and release, look at the automation and make sure that you can, the boring manual stuff is easily repeatable and automated, cuts down the mistakes, and it just makes sure the quality is there and right.
Yeah. Well, there's something I want to just sort of nudge onto that. There's this concept that I hear all the time, particularly in big organisations, of hot fixing. I think somewhere called it cherry picking things, and it's where there's items that usually are fixed to a defect that they really want in the release, and they will skip the process.
Yeah.
And it actually took me years to fully realise, hang on a minute, every time this hot fix or cherry picking happens, they've skipped that due diligence process. And that's just a game of roulette. That's a scary one. Sometimes it's great and you get the fix out there. Sometimes you cause more problems. Yeah,
I guess every scenario's got its own risk factors that probably have to be outweighed. It's like, do I go through a massive test cycle, or am I confident that I fix that one line of code and there's not going to be much impact on the rest of the code base?
Yes.
But I guess it depends how bad your production, bad your defect is in production to warrant taking that risk in the first place, doesn't it?
When there's queues of students at MacDonalds trying
exactly.
to get their free
burgers.
burgers.
Loads of people getting free burgers. You're like, I've got to get that fixed in quick.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting that you deploy a deployment and release manager, because I'm like thinking, we're going through the deployment and release cycle, and we're going to put it into live now, and like you probably felt the pressure in that role to get things into live, right?
Yes.
And I see a lot of the problems, and you mentioned that, and I see a lot of the problems result from this pressure. So the first problem I see is that people are really pressured to a deadline to get the release out, and then they cut quality corners right the way throughout the SDLC, and that is always a recipe for disaster. And I'll tell a positive story now. One of the best things I ever saw a manager say.
Positive story around defect.
yeah. So
They've done better than me. I couldn't
one
think
of the best things I ever saw a management team say. They, it was early days of agile development, and the developers, had started automated testing. They'd started unit testing, and they'd started doing automated acceptance testing. And of course, it's hard doing that when you first start doing it. Now we were coming up to a release, and and we were pressured to get that release in for a certain deadline, and the management team came up and they said, you let us worry about the release date, we'll manage the scope so that we hit that date. Do not change what you're doing, or keep doing your automated testing, keep making sure the quality is up. It's literally the best talk I've ever seen given to a development team.
Wow.
Because it so often doesn't happen like that. Quite often you get a manager who is telling me, well, we'll just cut a bit of the testing here, or let's not do some automated testing because we can hit the date. And it's like, it's always counterproductive.
It is. Yeah. Good. Huge cost.
Yeah. So I think, that for me, I think that pressure to release is always problematic, and I've seen teams who are on the cusp of a release, and I wonder sometimes whether some management teams have been bonused on their ability to get a software product in on a certain date, right?
I genuinely think you're right. People are judged whether they are on time, on budget, and on scope.
Yeah.
But they're not judged whether they
deliver
a pile of mess. As long as it's ticked those boxes. Yes, I have seen that, and I do think bonuses are certainly in the past have been in.
Yeah, I don't think people do that these days, because I think people realise it's counterproductive. But I've definitely been on projects before, and everybody's there going, we shouldn't be releasing this. And you've got a management team going, we are going to release on that date regardless.
Yes.
And but everybody's telling them they shouldn't do it, but they're giving it the green light. And you just don't know why, but it's one of those things. I think again, it's a practice I see less and less, but I think it was more commonplace. Not so much these days.
No, hopefully it's going.
So the lesson from that is never bonus people on their ability to hit a release date, to time, scope, and budget, because your quality will suffer.
Yes, I can think of a few ways incentives can just drive the wrong behaviour with defects.
Yeah. So we've released our system, right?
And it's live.
It's live.
Yes.
What can go wrong there?
Well, something, and again, you see it less these days, but where there's a separate team that maintains the live system and fix the defects in live, versus the team that developed it.
Yeah, I don't like this. It just causes massive confusion.
Yes.
So there's a tendency, I think. Well, the old adage in Agile isn't you build it, you run it, right? That's the whole kind of DevOps mantra these days, and it's so true, because there's two ways in which that can fall apart, right? The way you talked about, which was there's a separate team that do all the bug fixing and all that sort of stuff. It's like, well, hey, this doesn't. I can get away with this shoddy bit of code. Let's just chuck it in. Somebody else will clean up my mess.
Yes. And
the other thing is like your ephemeral project teams who are there, just for a 2 or 3 month period. They're kind of just purely tasked on that, build some features, and then go away.
Yes.
And they're not worried about that long-term quality aspects that we should be worried about when we're releasing a product, right?
Yeah, it intrinsically rewards lowering quality in order to just get stuff out.
Yeah.
And introducing more defects, and then massively increases the cost of fixing those defects.
Yeah.
Because you're asking someone who's not familiar with the work to try and figure out what's wrong. Yeah, it's craziness, and sometimes the person who built it's left the company or moved on to a different project. Yeah,
and I think it's very difficult when you've got a separate team that's dealing with defects. It's very difficult to kind of manage the whole process, because at one point, when you're in production, you've got pressure to fix the defects. You've got also pressure to build new features.
Yeah.
And in my mind, the only way it works is if you have one product team who build it and run it, who do all the bug fixing and do all the new feature development. Because actually, I see a lot of friction with business users who both want the defects done and they want the new features. It's like, well, actually, no. You've got to decide. Here's the backlog. Do you want this? Do you want a defect? Do you want a defect done first, or do you want a new feature done first?
Yes.
And actually, that's really important. You have to get to that point where there's business ownership of that backlog, which includes both defects and the new features. Otherwise, it just results in confusion.
I'm glad you said that, actually. Yeah. I've had this argument a few times as an agile coach right. as to how to treat defects.
Yeah.
And the fact is, they take time to resolve. They are work, and if you don't have them visible in the backlog, like you say, meshed with the stories, and sometimes you might choose to add a new feature before you fix a problem. That's okay. Yeah. But it's a trade-off. The whole time.
It's right. It's fine if you want to leave that defect in there. Leave that defect in there. Do that new feature, but make that your choice, and don't have this continual confusion that you can do. There's two top priority things. Yeah, no, that's a good one, and it's common to see that kind of friction around the defects list and the new features list, and what should we apply our time to? Well, it's obvious. Just merge them.
Yes,
and then put an order against it, and get everybody bought into it. Simples.
Yes.
What else about production and support? I think not having a great defect management process.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Just working with a team recently. They're going, well, we get all these defects in, but we don't know how to replicate them. So the defect comes in, it goes, oh, feature X didn't work.
Yes.
It's like, you've got no screen prints, you've got no kind of what I did before the defect emerged and what else I've tried. You don't have what machine you were doing it on or what browser you were doing it on. None of that information. When you start getting a maturity in that process, you get a socialization throughout your organization. If you actually want something fixed, you don't give something more than, oh, computer says no. Yeah. So I think that's really important from a defect management perspective, and helping to improve the quality, is that don't waste people's time you're wasting your own time by submitting this defect. You're giving it to a support desk operative who's also looking at it, and then they're passing it on to a developer who could be doing something actually productive rather than looking at your kind of ill-defined defect. So it just wastes everybody's time. And I think the production support thing's really important. I think the other thing is that making sure that the operations people that are going to run the product, because largely, great, a development team should definitely build and run, i.e. do the fixes of their bugs and make sure that the production application is up and running. But generally there's some frontline support, right?
Yeah.
And they need to know a little bit about the application that you've released.
Yeah, and I have seen them try and skip frontline support.
Yeah.
And just have developers act as frontline support. But I think often it's a slightly different set of skills being a good frontline support.
It is a different set of skills.
And there are some things that might be reported by multiple users. So you get the same problem reported by 50 people.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily want your probably more expensive developer answering those 50 calls. You want them summarised into one neat problem that you can pass them.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned that, actually, because that's one of the really good skill areas in a service operation. It's basically when you get continual problems arise, that that there's something that should be focused on.
Yes.
So that you see, well, this problem's affecting 50 users. I've really got good information that problem X is something that's affecting a lot of people and something that we should focus on. And that's really where you've got Whereas service function becomes really useful and really good. They're putting that analysis on the problem domain before it ever reaches the development team. So they've got that kind of element of prioritization as well, and really directing people to what they should fix.
Yes. And they're part of the team that makes sure the right information goes in there.
Yeah.
We God, I'm letting all my mistakes come out now. I once allowed Jira, what manage the developers' work, to be connected to the incident reporting system when a customer complains.
Just want to stop you there. We've been mentioning defects, and we haven't mentioned Jira in a whole hour. Oh. This is amazing.
Well,
sorry to interrupt your flow.
I spoiled it now. And we hooked the two together. Yeah. And suddenly Jira just became this unmanageable mess of noise. Of all this. It doesn't work when I click the send button.
Yeah. And there's definitely got to be a bit of a filter between the service management system and any agile work management system. That's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Otherwise, you just get a load of noise.
Yes. Hopefully, though, I mean, this is the whole. It's more expensive as you go down the line. If you fixed it early on by taking your laptop down to the user downstairs. Then you don't even bother to raise a ticket, do you? You've just quietly fixed your defect.
Yeah, I think, and we kind of wrap it up there, really, don't we? Because, defects in the production, and now we're talking about production and we're talking about live support, right? Defects in production, way more expensive to fix than when you catch those defects early on in the development process.
Yes.
And so it kind of wraps back nicely round, doesn't it? So that you want to build quality in all throughout that software development life cycle.
Yes. Shall I do a quick summary to finish off?
You do a quick summary.
Okay. So defects are bad for the obvious reasons, because they have direct costs of unhappy customers. Maybe you'll lose some profit because you didn't release something. Maybe there's legal and regulatory problems, but there are also other costs, so it leads into extra waiting, task switching, extra processing, extra motion, a whole load of extra work that you wouldn't ordinarily have if that defect didn't occur. That isn't always visible. It can occur at any stage in the product development life cycle. And what can we do? We can move testing to the left, document your quality standards and make sure you follow them, have that clear process, automate, have the right skills, do training. I am reading off a cheat sheet. You broke it, you fix it. But I think the key thing is everyone is responsible for quality.
Yeah,
it's not just the team at the end.
Everybody responsible for quality throughout the whole process.
And you will never get rid of defects completely, but you can reduce their frequency and their impact.
Yes, absolutely. Good stuff. All right, well, thanks for listening, and we'll be talking about more of the wastes of lean on our next podcast.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.